My name's Sam Belfield. I'm 44 years of age and I've been supporting the explanation of the human condition put forward by Jeremy Griffith for nearly 25 years, having read one of his earlier books, Beyond the Human Condition, when I was studying at university. As most people will be aware, there's an immense amount of contexting information in all the books that have been produced by Jeremy to date in the WTM. There's also the other affirmations on the website. So I'm going to sort of try and pick on a sort of an aspect of and talk about something that's, I suppose, relevant to me, and that is what I've experienced in terms of the magnitude of this change and the transformative effect of the information on me. And not only, I suppose, through understanding that transformative effect on me, seeing the potential for humanity. And I'm trying to, I suppose, want to convey my experience of its truth, its accountability, and in particular, something of what I sort of talk about, the power of knowledge or the power of logic and having a conscious mind, and through processing information and knowledge, how that can dramatically change your perspective about yourself, about the world, and where it's up to, and in particular, how this information, this knowledge, can change the direction of humanity and the planet at present. First of all, I just wanted to start with this quote from Transform Your Life. On page 65 it reads, "I kid you not, what you're soon going to see appear from one end of that horizon to the other is an army in its millions coming to do battle with human suffering, and its weapon will be understanding." If you process this information, if you let your mind access this information, you can be a part of that. If you let your mind process this information and follow the logic through, it will completely transform your life. It will transform how you see yourself and how you see humanity. There are heaps of benefits at a personal level of this information and processing it. But something I particularly want to sort of try and talk about is, or highlight, is a recognition that it's self-interest that is fundamentally destroying this planet. And at one level, we sort of know that if you boil it all down, that's an aspect or a manifestation of the human condition, and that's what is fundamentally destroying the planet. This information has the ability to end that self-interest, that selfishness, that egocentricity at a fundamental level. And through doing that, that's what produces this army in its millions to actually do battle with suffering on the planet and bring it to an end. That's the magnitude of this information. It ends our self-interest, and we all take up a life of living cooperatively and selflessly. That's what we have coming. That's how good it is. That's how special it is. And best of all, it's available right now and for everyone. So as I said, it's not make-believe, it's not a function of religion, it's not a function of dogma or discipline. It's actually a function of having a conscious mind and processing this knowledge or this information and responding to and following the implications of that knowledge and information through, and how it changes your perspective. That process can be challenging, but there is a path there. There is a new way of living here, and it's on right now, and soon everyone will be living it. Where are we all going? Recently I was flying back into Sydney and I was on a plane, and it was at night and it's coming in on the evening time, and I'm looking down on the sprawling city, the massive cars, the lights, there's all these people driving home, and I sort of had this reflection in my mind of sort of a rhetoric question of, where is this all going? Where does this all end up? What's this all about? And I think we live in a schizophrenic state. In one sense, we live in a massive amount of denial about the human condition, but on another level, we sort of do peek round the corner of life from time to time, and we ask these questions of, where are we going? If you're going to have children or you've had children, surely you've got to look into that crystal ball and say, where is humanity going? And I'd suggest that behind the smiles, behind the sort of the confidence to carry on, there's a deep anxiety about the direction that humanity is going. What I suppose I really want to hasten to add is that the insights in this book change all that. That book being, amongst others, Freedom, the End of the Human Condition. on the front of this book, it reads, "The book that saves the world." I can sort of attest to, or I can say I've experienced the truth of that. In fact, I'd sort of go a step further and say that in my experience, or in my view, it's the only book that can save the world. That's how fundamental it is. I've got a perspective on how this information, this book, is going to introduce a whole new paradigm. It's not about modifying the existing paradigm. It's not about trying to tweak that or improve that in some way. It's about a whole new model, a whole new state of mind for humanity. These are big statements, but if you genuinely let your mind understand this information and follow the implications through, your mind will validate that for yourself. Imagine, I just wanted to read this short excerpt of the lyrics from John Lennon's 1971 song, Imagine. "Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. All the people living life in peace. No need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. All the people sharing all the world." I mean, even now again, I hear that, the full version of that song, and it's unbelievable. And if you try and actually stop and actually get your brain to engage those particular lyrics, just to read them again, nothing to kill or die for, no religion too, all the people living life in peace, no need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man, all the people sharing all the world. It really is hard to get your brain to actually engage what that is all about. It's hard to take seriously. And very quickly your mind can bring forth sort of defences and reasons and excuses why, well, that's just not going to be possible. You know, our deeper nature is one of selfishness. We're brutal. Animals are competitive or red in tooth and claw, therefore we are. So when someone talks about the concept of a brotherhood of man, of cooperativeness, selflessness and what have you, it's very deep, it's very difficult to take seriously. We're sort of almost blind to another potential. It's like looking at a void or a vacuum. At another level, we're also aware of our immense habituation to living through self-interest, living egocentrically, proving our sense of self-worth. And we're aware of how habituated we are, and the whole world that we live in day to day is geared towards that. There's so much momentum. From there you can think, well, this is never going to happen. Talk of that is just a flight of fancy. But what I want to talk about, or the proposition I want to pose, is that if you actually engage this information in a genuine way, your mind will take you on a journey that completely reverses your view. And you'll sort of arrive at a point where not only do you work out that you can let go of and move beyond self-interest, egocentricity being the focus of your life, but you can also, through this information, understand that our deeper nature is one of being cooperative, loving and selfless, I should say, and not all these other things like competitive, aggressive and selfish. In fact, you can understand that self-interest has been like a temporary veneer, it's been a means to an end, if you like, while we've been trying to find knowledge, ultimately self-knowledge about ourselves. And as you start to sort of put those realisations together that, okay, we can actually change our perspective and move to a position where we understand that we can let go of competitiveness, selflessness, all this craziness, and that our deeper nature is actually one of being selfless, cooperative, and like Tony talked about a second ago, there being this deeper meaning, law of physics on Earth of integrative meaning, then you start to see how this army and its millions actually can become a reality. That to mention that quote I started with. My psychological baseline in terms of sort of who I am, and in and of itself, that's not particularly relevant. It's not really relevant at all. In some ways, why I want to talk about that is that it's a way of me demonstrating, if you like, obviously I'm trying to talk about my transformation and what have I, in a sense, transformed from to, in terms of how has my perspective changed, my state of mind changed. And I think talking a bit about who I am and how the human condition is manifested in me can end up being a sort of a vehicle for understanding the power of this information. Jeremy describes in detail the process of resignation that happens in mid-adolescence. The psychology of that event in your life is fundamental. I know I'm resigned, well and truly. I'm not going to go into the detail of that process. You know, that can be understood by reading the books and some of the other affirmations. But what I want to sort of talk about is how the human condition manifests in me on the other side of resignation and having taken up what that's all about. And for me, my state of mind is sort of characterised by two basic elements. And that is sort of competing to prove my sense of self-worth and a denial of upset of the human condition within me. Following resignation, we all develop a strategy to validate ourselves in some way. I took up a strategy of trying to be civilised and project a persona that I'm secure in my sense of self-worth, that my strategy's working, that it's giving me a sense of relief, that I have it all together, that I don't have this upset, I don't have this reality of the human condition brewing up in me. But in reality, I'm actually lying through my teeth. So I'm putting this persona out, I'm manufacturing a view of myself that I want other people to see and reinforce, and basically be reinforced as good and valid in response to that persona I'm putting forward. But if you scratch the surface, me, and this is not really necessarily unique to me, but I'll just talk about me. I've got a deep insecurity about my sense of self-worth, and in compensation for that, you know, I became consumed and addicted with power, success, achievement as a way of filling that void, if you like. Your sense of self-worth is totally conditional on how you think others are perceiving you. That state of mind defines your behaviour, and that's really important to understand that. That state of mind defines your behaviour. It dictates everything you do, how you go to work, how you dress, how you walk down the street. It's fundamental. As you get older, you become more punch drunk and you become more in need of that win and relief. You become more defensive and retaliatory towards criticism. You feel immense frustration, no matter what you achieve, no matter what achievement, success you get, that sense of relief is fleeting, and it's never enough. It's always thin. So it's like the game's loaded against you, and as a result of that, you become even more frustrated. As you get even sort of older still, you sort of see this murderous rage in yourself, a capacity for brutality, a capacity to kick the shit out of innocence in yourself and in other people. And to try and sort of make the point, Jeremy includes these images, paintings in freedom, and I just wanted to sort of say, I can relate to what they're about. There's this one here from Michelangelo's The Last Judgment, William Blake's Cringing in Terror. This one here from Bacon, and this little depiction by Jeremy talking about hollow adolescent man, 50-plus-year-old, terminally alienated hero of the story Life on Earth, and it's called Hollow Adolescent Man. So what I'm really trying to talk about is the human condition is real, it's in me, I've experienced that, and you see in yourself a capacity to sort of value nothing, and it's all a product of the human condition. It's a product of this egocentric necessity to try and validate that you're good, notwithstanding the fact that there are so many implications that you're bad, you're upset, you're evil. That state's bloody lonely and bleak because it's nigh on impossible to share that with anyone else. That is the duress of living with the human condition. So that's my base. That's my base psychological state post-resignation. So I've grown up with the human condition. That's how it's manifest in me. It's not unique to me. The human condition manifests in different ways in different people. Different people take up different strategies, but fundamentally, they're all about this thing of the human condition creates a sense of undeserved guilt or insecurity in our self-worth inside, and we take up a strategy to try and prove that implication wrong. When you look at what I've just described and how real that is in you and how it basically consumes you and dictates your state of mind all day, you are preoccupied with that. You can, when someone sort of comes along, if you go back to that concept of imagine and a new paradigm, you think, well, how do I undo that? Well, the good news is it's actually really simple and it's also honest. And I can vouch that I've been around this information a long time, and I've looked at that dilemma for a long time, and I've actually understood that there is actually a path through that, and it is simple. And, you know, it's not about trying to restrain all of that. It's not about trying to explain that all out of existence. As I'll talk about in a second, it's about actually moving on from it. So that's my psychological baseline. Moving on from the commitment to self-interest. So to sort of try and recap a little bit, your start position is you are in complete denial of the human condition and that's how you're living with the human condition, how that's manifesting in yourself. And I used to describe myself as a believer, as in you are a total believer in the ability of your strategy to give you relief. Mentally, you're wrapped up in the competitive model, this thing that permeates what we call the real world, the world that we go out into every day. And you convince yourself that the meaning of life is to be competitive and that success means we are worthwhile. But then as you start reading this information, it makes sense in your mind. It starts to break down your denial and you start to see that superficiality, that artificiality, that self-deception, that state of insecurity. In some ways, the information is like, you know, it's like a lens in terms of it's about bringing into focus how you are living, how the human condition is manifesting in you. And when you start off and you come across this information, you've got basically no awareness of the human condition in you. And then as you start reading the information, it's a process of increasing focus and clarity on actually how you're living, and it becomes more and more stark. At the same time, you've got the information, the knowledge, the logic of this information working away in your life, working away in your mind. More particularly how it provides the biological explanation for why we are fundamentally good despite our upset. In so doing, it ends the need for us to apply our strategy to feel good about ourselves and get relief. And you start to see, like I mentioned before, you start to see that all that self-interest, that egocentricity, it's been a means to an end. It hasn't been an end in itself. That the meaning of life isn't to be egocentric, alienated and angry. That's just been a symptom or a response in response to the human condition. And now that we can actually understand the human condition, that can start to subside. So you've got these two things going on. You've got the information working on producing greater transparency around the human condition in you and how you're actually living. And you've also got the logic of the information actually bringing into focus that way of living is no longer necessary. It's actually redundant because we've actually now got first principle explanation of why we are good. We don't need to prove that in any number of artificial ways. So then you reach a point where you get a clean take, a simple view on the way you're living. It's like you're outside, you're looking down on yourself, and there's a couple of things that sort of come together. In essence, you see that applying your strategy is not working, that it's destructive to you, it's destructive of relationships around you, that it's not giving you a lasting sense of meaning and security and wholeness. And in fact, the longer you go on, it's actually the reverse of that. And at the same time, that way, you actually start to appreciate that way of living is no longer necessary because the human condition's been explained. And sort of at the point of that clean take, you then, if you like, look across at the information. You've been there sort of focused on yourself and how the human condition's manifesting in you, how this information makes sense of the human condition in you. But then you look across at the information and you sort of think, well, what if I live through this information all day, every day? What if I use this as a framework for making decisions and managing my life? And the contrast just basically hits you like a bolt of lightning. You have a profound realisation. If I live through this information and if I hold it out in front of me, if I use it as my basis for managing my life, I transform my life, and as it says on the front of the book, I transform my life and I help save the world. That's how fundamental that sort of clean take is in your mind in terms of the realisation that you make. At a personal level, you see this opportunity where you get to step off the escalator of increasing upset, that all your problems are solved, but more importantly, you see that you're clearly applying your strategy now is redundant. And that's not just for you individually, but that's for humanity. that humanity as a whole has been on this journey. Self-interest, egocentricity, all of that's been a product of that 2 million year journey. We've now actually found understanding. Now all that behaviour that goes with that phase in our evolution, it can all subside. So you make a threshold decision to abandon your fundamental commitment to this competitive frame of reference. So at this point, the information sweeps in under you. You access and feel the compassionate message of the information at a whole nother level. You actually get to feel this concept that we are the heroes of the story. You actually get to reflect on the fact that how unbelievably hard it has been for us to persevere with this, in the face of this ignorant implication that we're evil, because if you look inside, you're aware of this punch-drunk reality of who you are, what it's capable of doing. Everything is suggesting that you basically are an evil monster, and yet it turns out through this information the complete opposite is the case, that we're actually the heroes of the story. Yes, we're massively upset, but we're actually heroic. You get to sort of see our collective story, and again, it's one of these things you understand more out the other side of this, is that it's not about the story of a certain race or this race and what have you. We're all humans. There is a story of all of humanity. There's a collective story, and as Jeremy describes in the book, that story is the greatest story ever told, and you actually start to feel that in your bones, and that is really quite special. You start to see that self is rested, to quote Prue Westbrook from one of the other affirmations. You see that you can stop having to prove yourself, and you can see that in an instant that it can stop in you, and therefore how it can stop in the world right now. I think one of the things that really struck me as well was just a sense of peace and relief from being able to stop the cycle of that ever-escalating, madness, and that by virtue of this clean take on who I am, and that's all redundant now, I can actually now move on to a point where there's an immense amount of peace and relief. So you arrive at a point where you've let go of that commitment to self-interest, and you see how you're really living, and you see that it's redundant. And this is all a product of your mind acting on this logic, which goes back to what I was trying to say at the start, is that it's, if you like, if I looked at where I was at the start of that journey, or what I talked about when someone talks about the lyrics from Imagine, you are aware of your commitment, your habituation, the momentum to self-interest, and you think, well, how is that ever going to be overcome? And yet what is absolutely mind-bending for me is that through processing this knowledge, you actually get to a point where you arrive at a point in your own mind. It's not something that's not pressure, it's not being compelled on you from without. It's actually your own mind moving your whole perspective through to a point where that's what you want to do. You see that it is actually now what you want to do. It's redundant, it's all you want to do is let go of that, living through that competitive framework, that self-interest. Moving on from the fear of confrontation. When we start reading this information, our mind has an awareness of where the subject matter is leading, the subject matter that it's setting out to broach. And our mind can sort of take, it sounds sort of funny, but your mind actually takes like defensive or takes preemptive action in terms of realising where that, it's got a preconceived view of where that information is going to be taking you, and that is to a subject matter that's going to be hurtful or confronting or leave you depressed or whatever. So it actually starts throwing up deflections and defences and roadblocks to you actually processing the information. That results in what we call the deaf effect. Following on from that, they'll sort of try and tease that out a little bit at a deeper level. For example, people close to me have said about this examination of the human condition that it's rattling the black box from people, and that you can't do that, and that this information is encroaching on the personal unspeakable, and that's not possible or it's not sensible. And that black box, that unspeakable if you like, that's not make-believe, that is actually real. I've experienced that. It is something that is very real. And I know where it's coming from, but what I want to say is it's an unfounded fear. That that black box is all this stuff that I've been talking about in terms of the human condition manifesting in you. It's all the shame, it's all the guilt, deeds and actions you've done in your life, it's all your corruptions, your perversions, whatever it is, it's all in that black box. And you spend a lot of time denying that that's in existence at all, and any time something encroaches on that, you're very quick to basically want to cover up and block that from happening. But what I want to sort of emphasise is you can have a misreading that this information is sort of reaching up inside you and forcing you to confront those hurtful truths that will leave you, dangling over an edge. But with a bit of time, your mind makes the realisation that this information is safe, and you actually hand that black box over to the information to look after. That part of yourself is not left out in the cold, it's not left stranded. You leave it with the information and you move on. And there's nothing in that black box that doesn't have a home with this information. And that was a very profound realisation for me, is that it's safe, that I don't have to continue to live in denial and cover up that aspect of myself. There's no dark thought or deed. All of that has a home in this information. And I don't need to face that down. I'm not denying it, I'm not despising it out of existence, I'm owning it, but I'm not engaging it, and I'm not focusing on it, and there's no need to do that. But there's an honesty and an integrity about it where you're not deluding yourself that it doesn't exist, you're not denying that it exists. So yeah, I just want to really emphasise that fear is unfounded in the context of this information, and if you feel yourself feeling that way, then you're not actually reading the information. As the book says, it's the naked but dignifying truth about humans. It is the confronting but compassionate full truth. It doesn't just naively and dangerously dig up all these truths and then sort of leave us stranded halfway. It actually lays out beautifully a way that we assimilate this information and takes us right across to safe ground. And it also talks about us not overly confronting the details of that upset. I just wanted to read this little section which is highly relevant from Transform Your Life. You and every other human can, as it were, put the issue of all our upsets, corruptions in a suitcase, attach a label to it saying everything in here is now explained and defended, and simply leave that suitcase behind at the entrance to what in the world transformation call the Sunshine Highway, and set out unencumbered by all those upset behaviours into a new world that is effectively free of the human condition. And I couldn't agree more with that. And I experienced the good sense of that and the need for that and the logic for that. So to recap, at the start you sort of think this information is never going to cover this dark side. But again, by virtue of letting your mind access the logic and actually reading what's talked about, becoming aware of the fact that this isn't naive, that there is actually a pathway laid out, you realise that there is a new way of living here that looks after all of that, and you leave that damaged, broken part of yourself with the information. It looks after it, and you're safe when you do that. And as I said, it doesn't miraculously disappear, but it's not living itself out. It's so safe and it's so authentic. Visualise the future. A key thing that you work out as part of the solution to dealing with these, I suppose, aspects of yourself that historically you've never been able to live with, is this concept of visualising the future and focusing forward. And that applies to both your commitment or your habituation to self-interest and also your denial about your upset state. And it's this concept of get the truth up and move on. It's about focusing your mind outward and onto the future. It's to visualise the potential for humanity now that the human condition is solved. And rather than focus on what you've let go and the relief, you focus on the future. And there's nothing supernatural about that. You've got a conscious mind. You can actually take it if you like. You can transport it to the future. You can choose what you think. You can choose what you want to think about, what you fill your headspace with. And as a result of this information, we've actually got the ability to take our headspace forward and think about, well, what is the human state going to be like now that we've actually got explanation of the human condition? And you can think about how good that is, and you can immerse yourself in that. You can think about how good is it that this peace, this end of this habituation, this end of this self-interest, what's that going to make possible? So we sort of transcend, we live high and wide from our upset, but we're not being dishonest about it. As I said, we're not being deluded about that. We're wrapping ourselves up in the future. And that basically, if you like, dwarfs or moves into the background any of that desire to live out your habituation or to feel a sense of confrontation about your upset. So your mind is not living here thinking about this mess all day. Your mind moves forward, way forward, and you work at that. Another journey starts. So you sit here for a bit and you can't believe your lucky stars. You focus on this sense of relief. You can't believe you can abandon that competition and you can live honestly but free of that state of upset. But then you sort of start to lift your head. And this is something pretty new for me, is that basically you've got this room in your head. You're no longer preoccupied with this desire, this need to basically prove that you're worthwhile all day, every day. So there's actual space in your mind. There's this lack of noise. And so what that enables you to do is you start to see, in sort of, if you like, even greater perspective, the wasteland that you've been in, and you actually see that humanity is spiralling out of control. And then you're also looking forward to the future, and you can see that all of that can stop right now. And that contrast, if you like, it just becomes starker and starker. It's actually a mind-bending frame of reference, in the sense that the human condition, the suffering, the manifestations of that can all stop right now. All that's required is dissemination and appreciation of this information. And when you see that, the priority focus is stunningly clear and self-evident. I've got to help progress this project. There's nothing else I want to do. You get the accurate perspective of what is in front of you, and you start to see that focusing on yourself is irrelevant. And that's why I love this image or painting by Genevieve Salter. And it's obviously of a rising sun, and that's depicting the information and the outcome that it brings about. And then there's the depiction of, in this case, herself with her arms in the air in front of that sun. And as I said, that just so accurately reflects the true perspective, the situation, the scale of the information and the situation that we're actually now in. And when you get a group of individuals or an individual living with that as their frame of reference, then it starts to bring into reality this life force. I know myself, I've gone from, if you like, myself being the centre of my universe, and you can't basically see any other potential to now, if you like, I'm living, if you like, with the benefit of transformation and following through the logic in my mind, living in a place where I can actually live and see what this is all about. And I'm so relieved that I basically, that's the scale of it, that's me, and that's the scale of this information. And if I can just tune into that, then it looks after me, and it goes back to this point before, that it's about transforming a life and help saving the world. So how about that? I've gone from this position of massive self-interest, and I've arrived at this position where, if you like, at one level, I don't want the focus to be on me. It's a case of, sign me up. What do I need to do? The potential of what this information can achieve. I can see it. It's here. It's right now. I don't want to be focused on me. So that contrast just gets starker and starker, and it just evaporates all that old stuff that you just thought would be impossible to let go of. And I suppose it's just about seeing the logical implications of this information. It's about taking up selflessness, as Tony talked about in the intro. It's an egocentric free existence. It's all about living and realising those implications. And it's about seeing that selflessness is consistent with our deeper nature. And as I said before, and Tony mentioned, it's about understanding how that's the integrative meaning, that's the meaning of life on earth, if you like. And so your instinct, our mind and our instinct actually start to come together. This battle to champion our goodness is won, so we can legitimately do this now. That's what translates that army into a reality. And for the next few generations, it's about supporting this information. That's what that selflessness translates into. We prioritise our life to that end. It's so simple and beautiful. I just become a tool to help bring in the new world. I just want to be in the speck. I want to be a speck in the mass of that army that I talked about. Imagine, surely if we could dream of a different world, surely if it would be along the lines of John Lennon's Imagine. Surely it would be an egoless rather than an egocentric, cooperative rather than competitive, selfless rather than selfish world. Imagine you could help change the world to peace right now. Try and engage that potential for 1 second. Then imagine the motivation and excitement to help realise that. Think of the collective energy and what that can achieve. This allows your mind to see how we can change the world and change it practically overnight. See how it will totally overcome the force of self-interest and egocentricity on the planet. When that force is aligned, competition can't come close. I've experienced how that can happen right now. I can vouch for that. That if you let your mind consume this information, you will arrive at that realisation and know it to be true. And as a byproduct, there will be peace, fulfilment, wholeness, meaning for you that you never thought was possible. This is not about self-improvement, about making yourself more effective or achieving more. This is not about becoming more virtuous or a better person. It's about ending egocentricity, competition and selfishness. It's about a new way of living where we serve the whole and not ourselves. That's how fundamental. It's actually not about us, the individual. And the fact that it's not about us paradoxically results in this sense of fulfilment and meaning that is a glorious byproduct. Out of love, in search of love. I just want to read this quote from Sir Lawrence Vanderpost. He who tries to go down into the labyrinthine pit of himself, to travel the swirling misty Netherlands below sea level, through which the harsh road to heaven and wholeness runs, is doomed to fail and never see the light, where night joins day, unless he goes out of love in search of love. And just something I want to touch on is that while as an extension of the focus is not on self, I did want to say the following. And early on, one of the deflections your mind can throw up is when trying to engage this information is to focus on the messenger and question the motives and character of Jeremy Griffith, the author of the work. And I just want to say, look, I've known him for 25 years and that every waking hour he's about ending the suffering on the planet through synthesising explanation of the human condition. He lives the example of the outcomes of this information, and that is to serve the whole, not self. It's not about him, it's the information and what it can achieve. He is living outside the cave, that what we've traditionally termed a prophet or unevasive thinker. He's defined by an integrity of character and an amazing mind that's unlocked an avalanche of insights that are seemingly insoluble and inexplicable. Again, if you genuinely let your mind consider this information, it will validate this proposition. He's weathered an immense amount of lies and persecution, character assassination. It's been a modern day stoning. It was as per Plato said, when a person tries to come back into the cave with the light, with the explanation of the human condition, they would try and kill him. He's shown a staggering resilience and courage. He's not superior, he's not of intrinsic greater worth, but he is unresigned and his mind has a unique capacity. It's a combination of circumstances that has enabled that mind and it's allowed him to go to the bottom of the well. In truth, you only need to read a page or two of this work to validate what I've said about the messenger. I just want to take a couple of my favourite pages. Firstly, there's this one on page 44, and it's talking about Don Quixote of La Mancha. Gloriously doomed battle after gloriously doomed battle, feeble beings charging out and trying to vanquish the outrageous giant, ignorance of the fact of our species' fundamental goodness. But that has been the lot of every human for some 2 million years. Wave after wave of quixotic humans have thrown themselves at that outrageous giant of ignorance for eons and eons, as bit by tiny bit they accumulated the knowledge that would finally make the redeeming explanation of our human condition possible. And Jeremy's drawn this little depiction here with this title of La Mancha, Don Quixote I should say, and called The Human Spirit. Yeah, I mean, when you start winding into just how special that is, it is unbelievable, that human spirit. I just love this. Gloriously doomed battle after gloriously doomed battle. Wave after wave of quixotic humans have thrown themselves at that outrageous giant. And then this of Jeremy's depiction or analogy of the Adam Stork story. And in particular, the fist that Jeremy's drawn here on Adam Stork. And a page or two over, he says in relation to that fist, or to that. And so every day, as we got out of bed, we took on the world of ignorance that was condemning us. We shook our fist at the heavens in defiance of the implication that we are bad. In essence, we said, one day, we are going to prove our worth, explain that we are not bad after all, and until that day arrives, we are not going to back down. We're not going to take the ignorant, naive, stupid, unjustified criticism from our instincts. The relief and compassion that runs through your body when you actually start to tune into what that little analogy is about, it is really quite amazing. I mean, and Jeremy, I think once said something to the effect of, in relation to, if you took all the works that are about the human condition and you put them and you filled a valley once and then you filled a valley twice, that you wouldn't get near the majesty of that little diagram, because that little diagram defends humanity or saves humanity, and it's actually true. Nourishment. While the future is the focus, this information is so relieving and nourishing along the way. There's so much confusion, there's so much we don't understand growing up, and there's so many apparent mysteries like, the differences between men and women, how do highly social insects like bees and ants evolve, why do men shoot animals for sport, why rock and roll, why beauty, why are we moved by the beauty of nature, you name it. While the focus is on the future, there's just so much reward in the short term. It's just something I wanted to really highlight, that there's just a lifetime of nourishment, so much brain food in terms of actually understanding what the hell's been going on in the world, and that's reward enough. What I live for now, there's so many good things to think about now. Stop destroying the planet, bridge the gap with more innocent races. A particular one for me is how different it's going to be for young men to grow up in the future. I see groups of young adolescent boys huddled together down at the shops, so unsure of where they fit in the world. Being a male, masculinity, being a man is increasingly without virtue. On the other hand, there's still this pressure from within and without to kick the crap out of that innocence, to grow up, to toughen up, to become a man, to take up this gloriously doomed competitive existence, to bury it, to kill it, this soft, if you like, this sensitive side of our side, die off inside and take up this existence. All of that's been unavoidable to this point in time. That's been a part of the human condition, but it's been psychologically and emotionally very painful. And I'm so glad that can stop now. Freedom. I was sitting on a plane recently, and across the aisle was a businessman. He's dressed in a suit, and he's watching this movie from probably, 5-10 years ago called Freedom Riders. It's about a teacher in middle America helping young adolescents. And it's a pretty moving and inspiring story. And then I realised he was watching this movie, and then I realised that he was actually crying and he was trying to pull himself together. It was a small insight that we all want selfishness to stop, and we want selflessness to reign. We're all desperate to go. Now humans have been exonerated and redeemed through this information. We can. Let's go, all forward, all together. Thanks very much.